Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's episode, we're doing yet another Tavour review. Today, we're going to be jumping into wild ales. Just going to be two beers in today's review. Wild ales are very interesting and they're all unique. They get the name from the wild yeast that gets into the beer that causes them to ferment. So it can run the gamut of sour to funk to everything in between with profiles that it brings to the beer. So they're all very unique and very different. Very interesting beer style. I happen to be a big fan. Today we're going to be starting with the Ale Apothecaries, the beer formerly known as La Tâche. This is a peach wild ale that's brewed with honey that was wine barrel aged. This clocks in at 7.8% ABV, and they are based out of Bend, Oregon. The second beer today is from Libertine Brewing Company. This is Refresh. This is a wild ale with peach and raspberries that's been aged in French oak barrels for 18 months. This one clocks in at 6% ABV, and they are out of San Luis Obispo, California. So we've got two wild ales. Both share a common ingredient with peach, but both go off in a completely different direction. So it'll be really interesting to see how closely aligned these two beers are and how much they diverge from one another. Nonetheless, I'm ready to get started. So we're going to get cracking with the Ale Apothecaries, the beer formerly known as La Tâche, 7.8%. All right, so jumping straight in to the Ale Apothecaries, the beer formerly known as La Tâche. Wild ale, peach with honey that has been wine barrel aged. Everything about this sounds awesome to me. Very kind of old school looking label here, kind of neat. Just simple. It looks like they might even use recycled paper for their labels. So if that's indeed true, good on them. Waste not, want not. Nonetheless, we're going to be using goblet style here, which is really good for wild ales. So let's just get this poured right in the glass. Oh, that is a lovely, lovely, lovely beer. It's not going to form much of a head. It shouldn't. Most sours do not, and they should not. That is a beautiful golden yellow color. I mean, it is just stunningly beautifully golden. And very, very, very effervescent indeed. Looks just absolutely beautiful. As anticipated and expected, and as you can quite clearly see, no head, so to speak. It formed a little bit, but sour beers, it just isn't going to be a thing. They're more effervescent, and you don't really want a big creamy foamy head on your sour ale. It's not right for the style. And I always would be questioning how and why the head formed if I got one on a sour. Nonetheless, this looks great. Let's give it a sniff. It smells really nice. It smells sour, and you can absolutely smell the peach quite strongly, and you can smell the honey in there. I think that they probably used a heavier hand with the honey than I was anticipating. I can't really pick up the wine barrel aging, but I expect that it's probably going to come out in the flavor profile a bit. So without further ado, let's jump right in and see what this one's about. Oh, this is a sour lover's dream right here. Oh, man. Wow. Oh. Oh, this is big. This is big and complex. Okay, up front, pungently sour and tart. Pungently so. It just whacks you, wakes you up with how sour and tart it is. Then it just bursts with peach. I mean, just absolutely bursts with peach. It is so prevalent all over the palate, and that sour and that tart and that peach, they just keep combining, and then it opens up big time into that honey. And the wine barrel aging kind of has added, I don't know what type of wine barrels they used. I'm guessing maybe a white wine barrel aged, possibly Chardonnay, because I'm picking up notes of vanilla, which would indeed get imparted from a typical Chardonnay or some other similar white wine. That's a very common flavor component. And it really, really pairs well with this honey flavor and this peach and just the fact that it's sour. And this is super, super clean. I'm going to dive in for another sip. That's just spectacularly good beer. It's just spectacularly good beer. This is hands down one of the best sours I've ever had in my life. No question about it. The mouthfeel is quintessential sour. It's got a little weight to it, 7.8% ABV. So the body's there. I'd say it's medium. It's a medium body, which is kind of heavy for a sour, for the average sour. But the mouthfeel is very classic sour. It's super effervescent. It's got a little bit of weight to it, but not a lot of viscosity. And it finishes a little dry. Between the souring and all the other ingredients that are in there, I mean, this is just a really beautifully, beautifully put together beer. The balance is just unbelievably good. I'm really, really blown away with how amazing this beer is and how all of the components came together. I had an idea that it was going to be really good just from the aroma and looking at it, and it looks the part and it smelled the part, but you never really know until you get to jump in and taste it and actually see what the brewer created. And I tell you, they absolutely have a winner on their hands with this one. This is a phenomenal, phenomenal sour ale. In the world of wild ales, this ranks right up near the top of any I've ever had. This is fantastic. I am absolutely loving this beer. I'm going to take my sweet time going thoroughly through to come up with my rankings. And when we come back, we'll get to our second and final beer of the day, the Libertine Brewing Company's Reef Rash. That one is also a wild ale brewed with peach as well and raspberries. And it's been aged in French oak barrels for a year and a half. Okay, moving on to our second and final beer of today's beer review. We're moving on to the Libertine Brewing Company's Reef Rash. This is another wild ale. This one is brewed with peach and raspberry, and it's also been aged in French oak barrels for a year and a half. 6% ABV on this one. They're out of San Luis Obispo, California. Bottle art, kind of interesting, I guess. It's a little reef scene with a peach and some raspberries floating in the ocean there near the coral. So interesting looking label. Relatively subdued. It was a corked bottle, so make sure you have a bottle opener, cork pull. If you don't have one, or you'll have a heck of a time getting in this beer. It's under the cap. Nonetheless, let's get this poured straight in the glass. Oh, that is a beautiful color as I'm pouring this. It's a light, rather kind of pink hue to it. Really, really lovely beer. Very, very effervescent. Yeah, that's a nice, deep, kind of pinkish orangey hue, and it's very, very effervescent indeed. This one actually did get just a little bit of a head on the top, and it's quickly getting out of the way there. It will have a little cling to the glass just because it's so effervescent, but no real head, so to speak. Let's give this one a sniff. It smells very nice. You can smell the sour quite present up front. It smells very sour, and you can smell the fruit as well. The raspberry I could definitely get. The peach didn't really jump out at me. No, not really detecting the peach on the nose, but the raspberry for sure, and the blend of raspberry and sour tend to go together, so that aroma is going to come out a bit more pronounced than anything else that's in there. They just pair extremely well together. That's why you'll see a lot of framboise lambics, raspberry. It just goes well in a sour style beer. It's one of those fruits that just pairs very, very well, like they were made for one another. Nonetheless, no, smells great. The appearance is absolutely gorgeous. Let's jump in, give this a sip. Oh, That's a nice beer. It's quite a bit different from the Ale Apothecary that we sampled prior. This has a bit of that classic Brettanomyces funk. Wild ale, wild yeast. Brettanomyces could certainly be in that strain. It could have other sourced local wild yeast that, that's part of the excitement of a wild ale. These wild yeast strains, you never really know what they're going to bring to the table. This one brings a good bucket of funk. It's very pungently sour up front, very tart, but that quickly dissipates in just heavy funk notes. It's hard to describe. You would know it if you had it and so somebody said, "Oh, that's a funky beer," and then you tasted it. Oh, I see what they mean. Yeah. I don't know the best way to describe what the flavor sensation is like when I make a reference to funk. It's really the best descriptor. It's a peculiar flavor. You either kind of love it or hate it, or I guess you're in the middle and you can tolerate it. I like it. It's a very interesting flavor. It makes for a very unique beer experience. Now, breaking down past that, the fruit is very subdued in this beer, brewed with peach and with raspberry, and neither of those are really jumping out at me at the forefront. It's sour tart, then funk, and then just hints of the fruit. Yeah, just a hint of the raspberry and peach. The peach comes through in the flavor, not so much on the aroma. And the raspberry come through. But honestly, the fruit are very second fiddle to the upfront sour and then the big mouthful of funk. That's the bulk of the flavor sensory experience. It's about 15% upfront sour tart, dissipates within a second or two. Then it's full on funk for, gosh, probably 80% and maybe 5% fruit at the very end, and that's it. It doesn't have a long finish. It's got a decent body, considering the lower ABV. The mouthfeel is classic wild ale, very effervescent. It's very, very smooth, but very bubbly, and you definitely get that. There's a little weight to the body, which I didn't anticipate, but the finish is really short. And honestly, in terms of balance of what they put into this and what it's billing itself as, it's not the most well-balanced beer. The funk takes over too much of this beer, which it's a wild ale, and that's fine, but to be a peach and raspberry wild ale, aside from adding some beautiful, beautiful coloring to the appearance, it's really completely lost in this beer. I mean, it's just such a minute aspect. I don't know. It's a good beer. It's an enjoyable beer. And if you like wild ales or funky beers, Brettanomyces brewed beers, this is one that you would probably enjoy. But don't be expecting an overabundance of peach and raspberry. The peach was so present in the Ale Apothecary that we sampled prior. This is a complete 180. I mean, they're not even comparable. This is a good beer, and I enjoy it. But it's certainly not going to be for everybody, and it is a little disappointing that the peach and the raspberry didn't come through as much as I was hoping. Nonetheless, I'm going to take my time, pick this apart, come up with my scores, and we'll come back and go through both of the rankings from top to bottom. All right, now that we have gotten to sample both of these beers, we're going to go through and get them their ratings, starting with the Ale Apothecaries, the beer formerly known as La Tâche. This is a peach wild ale that has been brewed with honey, which has been aged in wine barrels. So wine barrel aged honey added to peach wild ale. This is out of Bend, Oregon, 7.8% ABV. Starting out, the aroma was very, very nice. You could smell very pungent, the sour and tart character, as well as a nice big volume of peach in there. And it really came through quite nicely. Well above average, 8 out of 10. The taste on this was unbelievable. I have had many a wild ale, but I have not had many I liked as well as this. This is top tier for wild ale. Perfect 10 out of 10. For the body, Again, this was just another category where this beer really nailed it. Wild ales kind of run the gamut in terms of their body. Mouthfeel is pretty consistent, but the body really has a lot to do with ABV and fermentables in there. This one's 7.8. This is a pretty stinking high ABV on a wild ale, and it definitely showed with the substance and the girth that the body had. I gave that a 9 out of 10. The mouthfeel on this was textbook perfect wild ale. It's just really smooth and highly effervescent. It's just indicative of this style. That's how they are. They are very effervescent beers. This was textbook, 10 out of 10 for the mouthfeel. The finish on this was really nice, and it was really long. It let you get a ton of the sour, a ton of the tart, a ton of the peaches, and then the honey came in, and then you started to get the flavors and notes that envelop from the wine barrels, which I got a lot of vanilla that started to interplay, and how that paired with the peach and then the sour and tang. I mean, it was just absolutely delicious. A nice long finish. It was a little drier than I anticipated. It's the only reason I docked a point, but still ridiculously high score, 9 out of 10. The head and retention on this, there was essentially none, so to speak. So that's perfect for the style, 10 out of 10. The appearance on this was an absolutely lovely beer. This was rather a classic looking wild ale, and it did get a little hue imparted from the peach. I gave that a perfect 10 out of 10. The balance on this one, everything played so well in harmony. Nothing in this beer overshadowed anything else, and it was very even all the way across from start to finish. All of the independent parts that went into making this beer got to have equal voice, and it was textbook perfection in balance. This was a masterclass in how to balance a beer. 10 out of 10. The feeling in the intangible, as you might already suspect, I absolutely love this beer, and if you were guessing 10, you're correct. I give it a perfect 10 out of 10. I loved it. This is one of the best, if not the best, wild ale I think I've ever had. I absolutely recommend this one highly. It is a more expensive beer, but it's definitely worth the price in my opinion. Finally, as an example of the style, again, I come back, I've had many wild ales, and certainly they can run the gamut in different traits. That's kind of part of what's fun about wild ales. You never really know what you're gonna get. But this was just so freaking well crafted. Everything that they thought about, that they set out to do, that they put into this beer, that went into making it, just was absolutely top notch and masterfully executed. I gave that a perfect 10 out of 10 as well. That brings the total score up to 96. We're talking only 4 points shy of perfection, and it's really just a couple little nitpicky areas. I mean, this is about as close as it gets. If you're a fan of wild ales, I highly recommend you to seek out this one. It is a pricier beer, but it is a good large bottle, and it's one you could enjoy over a long time or share amongst friends. This is just an absolute pinnacle of the style example, and I do highly recommend it. Well done, The Ale Apothecary. First beer I've had by you. I will be seeking out more. That is a fact. Moving on to number 2. This was Libertine Brewing Company's Reef Rash. This again is a wild ale. This also had peach in it, but they had raspberry as well. And then the different thing that they did here, since there was a bit of barrel aging in both, this was the actual beer itself. This was an ingredient that was used in the beer, but they French oak barrel aged this for 18 months. 6% ABV on this one out of San Luis Obispo, California. The aroma on this one, very much the same story as with the first beer. And for the same reason, I gave it an 8 out of 10. The taste on this one. The taste was nice. It was very much one of the types of wild ale characters that you can get. You got a nice punch of sour and tart up front, but then it opened heavily into funk. A la Brettanomyces, which is very common with wild ales, and indeed it's more often the norm than not. The problem that I had with the taste on this beer was it was not balanced, and the funk was so overpowering that after that burst of sour and tart up front that really only lasted 1 to 2 seconds, it was just a mouthful of funk, and it completely overshadowed the peach and the raspberry. I mean, it was just almost imperceptible that they were in there. And I had to take that into consideration. So still above average because it was good for the style, but the peach and the raspberry got lost, as did the oak aging. So just a 7. Still above average, but just a 7. The body on this was very nice. 6% ABV. I was actually kind of surprised at how much presence it had. But it was certainly well above average, 9 out of 10. Mouthfeel on this one, just like the first one, this was textbook wild ale, very smooth, very effervescent, 10 out of 10. The finish on this beer. The finish on this beer was not even remotely long at all, and frankly, the way that it finished was just, it was okay. I don't want to say it was bad. It wasn't. It was disappointing because I had very high expectations and it didn't meet them, which is okay. Not every beer is going to be top tier, and not saying this is bottom tier. I'm just saying for what it set out and what it was billed as, I was expecting a lot more and I just didn't get it. Finish, I gave it a 6. The head and retention on this one was just 1 point shy of perfection because frankly it actually did get a decent amount of head and it took it a hot minute to dissipate. You don't really want a head on a wild ale any more than you want it on any other sour style beer. Frankly, it's not normal for the style and it's kind of off-putting with that flavor profile, but it was very minimal, so I still gave it a very high score. I gave it a 9. The appearance on this was a stunningly beautiful beer. The color that got imparted from the addition of the peach and raspberries added this beautiful pinkish orange hue, and it was just lovely in the glass. I give that a perfect 10 out of 10. The balance. The balance is where we come back full circle to where I was going on with the taste and the finish. This was not a well-balanced beer, in my opinion, and really there's a few reasons for it, but the sour and tart didn't last nearly long enough. The funk came through far too heavily, and it just almost completely drowned out the fruit. It was maybe 5% of the overall flavor profile, and it was the very end, and you really had to be paying attention to even detect it. And then a 1.5 years in French oak barrels, I expect that to impart a lot of different nuance to the beer, and I didn't get any of it at all. So for me, the funk, the wild ale funk just overshadowed the barrel aging that they took the time to put into this beer, and it overshadowed the fruit that they took the time to pick to put into this beer. I just gave it average, 5 out of 10. Feeling the intangible, I rated 1 point higher than the balance, and you can already guess my reasons behind it. It's everything I already laid out. I enjoyed the beer, but I just thought it was okay for what it was and what they made and what went into it. It was just okay. Still on the higher end of okay, but just okay. 6 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, I gave it the exact same score as my filling in intangible, and it's all the same reasons I mentioned before. It's a good beer. It's a good wild ale, and it's certainly at least on the high end of average, which is where I put it at a 6. But what it was set out to do and what it was billed and what they did with it, the execution just wasn't there for me. That funk just completely overshadowed every other bit that went into making this beer, and it took out some of what could have truly made this special for me. That brings the total score on Libertine's Refresh up to a 76 out of 100. So it might have sounded like I was beating up on this beer, but I really wasn't. I'm just giving you my honest thoughts on what it was that I experienced. And a 76 is still well above average. That's a high score. Just compared to the Ale Apothecary, it seems low. That's a 20-point spread, but a 76 is still a really good score for any beer. That's well above average. Nonetheless, that's our 2 wild ales for today. It's a style I absolutely love. If you're a fan of sour beers and you've never tried a wild ale, They're a little wild, wild west. They can take you in some interesting directions. If you've never experienced a funky beer, a funkier saison or farmhouse ale, or any sour that's been brewed with Brettanomyces, you may not know what I'm talking about, but you'll know it when you taste it. A lot of people have a love-hate relationship with it. Some people are just in the middle, take it one way or the other. I like it, but it's got to be balanced and it's got to play its part with everything else that goes into the beer. So it's a very unique style. It's not for everybody, but if you're feeling rogue and you're feeling, like you might want to try something different and you've never tried it, I say give them a whirl. Give them a whirl. You never know what the next beer that knocks on your door you're really going to enjoy and discover and get you excited for another area in the realm of craft to try. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to wrap it up for today. As always, we do appreciate you tuning in. If you want to know when our videos go live, you can click the notification bell. You'll get notified as soon as they get published to YouTube. We are a growing channel. I know you hear this a lot, but it really does help if you'd please consider liking and subscribing. It'll help other people find our content as we are trying to get as much information out there in all various facets of the craft beer movement. We're just happy to be a part of it and just want to spread the word. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.